Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. Syria is at a critical juncture in its 8-year-long war that has, at last count, left more than 560,000 people dead. The country's last opposition stronghold of Idlib, once a bastion for those fleeing Bashar al-Assad's brutality, has instead become the regime's latest target. The back and forth between Assad's forces and rebels has seen several key villages change hands since the renewed push gained steam in April. Observers on the ground say that about 200,000 people had to flee their homes this past month alone. And it isn't just people that are being targeted. The World Health Organization says more than a dozen hospitals have been bombarded or destroyed by the regime. In hopes of avoiding a humanitarian disaster, last September, Russia, Turkey and Iran agreed to extend a ceasefire in Idlib. It included a 30-kilometer buffer zone that was meant to separate the warring sides. But that agreement all but unraveled as Assad's forces stepped up their campaign to conquer Syria's last rebel stronghold. The violence has reached a point where many aid groups are being forced to suspend their humanitarian operations. Later in the show, we'll bring you an exclusive report from northern Syria, where TRT World gained access to suspected foreign Daesh fighters who are awaiting trial in rebel-held areas. But first, we'll break down the deteriorating situation in Idlib, and joining me to discuss that are Hakkı Öcal, who is an assistant professor at İbn Haldun University here in Istanbul, and Yasser Tabarrah, who is a senior researcher at the Omran Center. He is also a legal advisor to the Syria Forum. Gentlemen, I would like to welcome you both to Straight Talk. Yasser, let me start with you. What is exactly happening in Idlib, and why Idlib is of utmost importance to all sides concerned?
Well, for the past couple of weeks now, the Russian Air Force teamed up with the Syrian regime's Air Force as well, have been bombarding heavily the area of northern Hama province and southern Idlib province in the hope of putting pressure on the fighting factions in that area, in hopes of putting pressure on Turkey and the international community. What they have been wanting, and this is why Idlib is of utmost strategic importance, is Idlib is regarded, at least from the point of view of the Russians, as one of the last strategic strongholds of the Syrian opposition. And they've been claiming that they wanted to, quote unquote, purify it from these opposition elements, which they indiscriminately describe as terrorist groups.
Yeah. Hakkı, as Yasser mentioned, but regime forces backed by a Russian aircraft pounded some targets. What can you tell us about the timing of the operation? Why now?
There are a couple of theories about that. Turkey didn't keep its promise to keep the terrorists, quote unquote, inside the determined non-escalation zone. But they are doing some attacks to the Syrian regime forces, which is not true. I mean, you put almost every armed opposition group in one small area, and you are expecting them not to do anything. They are opposing the government. They are under the constant threat from the regime. Of course, they would do something that you don't enjoy. Second theory is that Russians are trying to pressure Turkey vis-à-vis the S-400 transaction between Turkey and Russia. These both theories might be true, might be, I don't know.
But the lives of the innocent people are at stake.
What Russians are doing, I mean, in that area, they are violating Turkish people's trust, Syrian people's trust in them, and they are also violating their relationship with Iran. I mean, it is terrible. Every day we have this little girl, pictures of pierced bodies and everything. I mean, it is not right thing.
We're going to talk about it. Yasser, I want you to talk about HTS Tahrir al-Sham. It's said to have 10 to 12,000 fighters, and it has lately stepped up its attacks. Could you tell us about who is supporting this group financially? Who who's arming them, and how do the Idlib residents view them?
Well, HTS in general, I think, is an exaggerated force in Idlib.
Is it?
Well, the reason is because of their brutality and their sort of approach to dealing with civilians and dealing with some of the factions around them. If you look at the fighting factions in Idlib that belong to the opposition, belong to something called Jabhat al-Tahrir al-Watani, or the National Liberation Front, which is an iteration of the Free Syria Army in that area, where a number of factions came together and formed this front. You'll see that by numbers, they are larger in numbers than the HTS. One of the reasons why HTS has become the status that it attained within Idlib is because it has been able to brutally suppress anyone who opposes it. In terms of its financial resources, they've controlled a number of trading points between the areas that they control and the areas that are controlled by the regime, for example. And so you have the income stream that comes through these border posts, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Hakkı, let's take a look at Turkey's position. Turkey have now this unenviable job of convincing moderate groups to leave the buffer zone and lay down their arms.
Yes.
But in light of the latest developments, some attacks occurred next to Turkish military posts. So what do you think can Turkey hope to accomplish?
First of all, Turkey it was doing very good job. I mean, those moderate groups are now inside certain areas, and they are not harming anybody. As the name suggests, they are moderate groups. But there are some groups there Turkey cannot control unless Russians are helping us, or Syrian regime is not provocating them. The very existence of the Assad regime there is a provocation by itself. I mean, when he is there and when he continues killing people, innocent people, and you are opposing them, and you are supposed to sit here, don't do anything about it, well, it is very difficult.
All right. One thing we haven't talked about yet is the foreign fighters in Syria. One area of the country that is dealing with this issue is northern Syria. And now we have this exclusive report by TRT World, Sarah Firth, who traveled to northern Syria, where she met suspected foreign Daesh fighters who are awaiting trial.
Behind these bars are people suspected of belonging to the terror group known as Daesh. Having lost all territory in Syria, tens of thousands of Daesh members, including many foreign fighters, are now being held. Most of them are in eastern Syria and under the control of the Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, the group backed by the US. The SDF are predominantly made up of YPG fighters who are linked to the PKK, a terrorist group that has waged a decades-long war against Turkey. Under the SDF, some suspected Daesh fighters are managing to escape. How much did you pay the smuggler to get you out of Baghouz? $7,000.
Yes.
Some have been caught and ended up here, in areas of Syria under the control of the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, who are backed by Turkey. We managed to gain access to one prison, take a look at life behind bars, and witness Daesh trials taking place. In this prison in northern Syria, an attempt by the Free Syrian Army to bring those who were part of the Daesh terror group to justice is already underway. Some of those accused of belonging to Daesh are going to court. Whole families are being held here, men, women and children. They're loaded onto a bus and taken to the local courthouse. One at a time, they're brought before a panel of trained Syrian judges and lawyers to hear the charges against them and defend their actions. So we've just been watching some trials take place here in this courthouse for those that are accused of being members of Daesh. They've been charged with being members of a terrorist group and taking up arms. And what we witnessed in a small, cold courtroom is justice of sorts being done. Usman Mohammed is a 33-year-old Ukrainian plastic surgeon. He's accused of working as a doctor for Daesh, a claim he strongly denies. Were you a member of Daesh?
No, never.
Never?
Never, yes.
You were living under Daesh.
Yeah.
It's a terror group. They've carried out atrocities. They've tortured people. They've raped. They've murdered. And you were living under their rule. Do you understand, and what would you say to the victims of people who are looking at someone like you and saying you should be held accountable?
But what I came to tell, it is not I didn't do anything of that. I didn't do nothing of that, and I was victim like them. But my situation was a little bit different, more comfortable situation, because I was Muslim first of all, and I was Muslim, and I was a useful Muslim, useful as a staff.
Usman tells us he was captured by the SDF when Baghouz was taken earlier this year. But he was able to smuggle himself out. How long were you in Baghouz for, first of all?
It's about 2 months.
2 months?
Yes.
And how did you get out?
I get out when it's getting worst. I couldn't find them because we had what's called like contract, like agreement with one guy. But
you were smuggled?
Yeah, he was smuggler. He should go the next day, and the situation was changing very quickly. I was afraid that I couldn't get him at that time, and maybe that night anything can happen with us.
How much did you pay the smuggler to get you out of Baghouz?
$7,000.
$7,000?
Yes.
And where were you trying to get to?
Actually, I was trying to get Idlib, and there I can work.
In Idlib?
Yes, I can work as my normal job, and I can get, time by time, I can get what's called, I was wish to ask diplomatic protection from any countries, and it can give me that.
Usman's trial is conducted in Arabic. He has a translator on hand, but not everything being said he understands. And it's not just men that are on trial here. Their wives stand accused of aiding and abetting and are also facing jail time with their children. Both men and women can face anything from 1 year to a 20-year prison sentence. Among those suspected Daesh fighters that have been caught and held by the FSA are Europeans, including British and French nationals. We gained an exclusive interview with the region's chief prosecutor, Mohammed Ayoubi, and we asked him how many Europeans are now in FSA custody. It's a sensitive topic.
Atlayacağız. Atlayalım mı atlamayalım? Bence atlamayalım. Siz nasıl isterseniz. Yok istemez onu. Tamam. Bazı yabancı uyruklu olan IŞİD mensuplarının buradaki hüküm süreci bittikten sonra şu anda bizim Azez bölgesinde bir yabancı barınma kampı diye kurduğumuz adliye ait olan orada barınıyorlar. Ama şu an açıkça biz Avrupa kökenli olanlardan kimsenin daha hüküm süreci biten olan olmadı yani. Hepsi daha cezaevindeler.
Despite European countries publicly claiming they will not take back their nationals accused of fighting for Daesh, the Syrian prosecutor claims European fighters are secretly being taken out of the country.
Şimdi ana takımlar ya da yüksek seviyedeki rütbeli olanlar zaten onlar yanımıza ulaşmadı. Onları bir şekilde Amerika'da ya da Avrupa uçaklardan yerlerinden kaldırıyorlar. 3 yıldan beri, 2015'ten beri ya da 2016'dan beri Amerikan savaş uçakları kaç defa Derizor olsun, Rakya olsun orayı operasyon yaptı, orada şahısları aldı gitti. Bunun manası ne? İngiliz'den Fransız yapıyor. Burada Amerika 3 ülke yapan var bunu.
It's a major allegation. Many European Daesh fighters that travelled to Syria are currently not traceable. We put these allegations to the UK, US and French officials. All declined to respond to the specific allegations. For now, it's clear that the burden of responsibility for these suspected Daesh members lies in the hands of different groups across Syria. This prison is one of 5 in FSA-controlled territory that hold around 1,000 prisoners in total. While the suspects await their trials, the Free Syrian Army provides daily lessons like this one and teaches new skills like cooking and needlework. For some of the prisoners, regular family visits are allowed. This system is far from perfect, but this is as good as it gets right now in Syria. The FSA are dealing with these Daesh suspects already in their custody and working to capture those smuggling themselves from SDF-controlled areas. European countries have so far publicly refused to step in to alleviate the burden. But there may be action being taken behind closed doors. Sarah Firth, Straight Talk.
So that was an exclusive report from Sarah Firth from northern Syria. To break it all down, joining our panel from London is Ian Black, who is a senior visiting fellow at the Middle East Centre at the London School of Economics. Ian, thanks for joining us here on Straight Talk. Let me start with you. Where do these Daesh fighters stand when it comes to the international law, and what are their rights? How are they supposed to be prosecuted?
Well, it's quite a complicated story. I think it's important to point out that this is all quite new. It was only at the end of March that President Donald Trump declared victory over Daesh, ISIS. And since then, the issue of the future of particularly of foreign and European fighters with Daesh has become a big problem. There's no obvious solution, and nor is there any kind of consistency between the different countries. I mean, the American position is that countries should repatriate people who have fought with Daesh, and they should stand trial in national courts. But that hasn't happened very much at all. I mean, for example, there's a case in Britain, a well-known case of a young woman called Shamima Begum, who is in a camp in northern Syria. She was with Daesh, and she has been stripped of her British nationality, but is now fighting through the courts. She's still in Syria, and she's fighting through the courts to be allowed to come home. There are similar inconsistencies with the French and German governments as well,
Yes.
which together, those 3 countries make up the largest number of European volunteers. So it's early days yet in a complicated story.
Yes, and on the other hand, tens of thousands of foreign fighters. I'd like to ask you this question to you, Yasser. They didn't come alone. They brought their families, they started their families while fighting for Daesh in Iraq, in Syria. Where do they families stand when the international law is concerned? Because we've seen Iraq handing out some sentences for the spouses of those fighters, whether it be a prison sentence or a death sentence for aiding and abetting the fighters. Where do they stand?
Well, it depends on the criminal code under which that you're trying to conduct trials for these suspected criminals. But universally, usually, the concept of aiding and abetting requires some form of mental state and some form of action. And so if these families were there, even though it's not against their will, but they were there just as spouses and children, I suspect that they would be culpable by this aiding and abetting doctrine. But I'd be remiss, actually, not to go back and sort of recontextualize this entire, ISIS fighters, potential prosecution as war criminals. I mean, I think that while this is extremely important and a step that is very much needed in terms of international justice as to what took place in Syria towards Syrians, especially Yazidi women and other minorities in the north, one has to absolutely acknowledge that the number one culpable party in terms of the destruction and the mayhem and the absolute murder and mass murder of the Syrian people is the Assad regime. Some of the reports actually put them at 95 to 97% as the responsible party for the majority of the victims in Syria. And so, as a Syrian, I look forward towards a day that we have an international legal mechanism to prosecute not only Daesh, which is very much in needs of prosecution, but also of Bashar al-Assad and his regime for their culpability as well.
All right, Ian, I just want to get back to you. You've just mentioned the different stances adopted by different countries, namely France, Britain, and America. And just in the past week, Iraq has announced that it would be executing several French nationals. Could this set a precedent for other countries like Syria that are dealing with the foreign fighters? What do you say?
Well, I think that we know that there have been various foreign fighters have been transferred into Iraqi custody, including, interestingly, just a report by Reuters a few days ago saying that the United States had transferred foreign fighters into Iraqi custody, despite the formal position of Washington that it wants fighters to be tried in their own countries. So again, that's part of the inconsistency in government approaches to this question. The French government has, of course, protested against those sentences, the death sentences handed down by Iraqi courts. But of course, it's shown no signs of wanting to repatriate French nationals for them to face justice in their own country.
So Ian,
that's exactly what I was...
Yeah, as you mentioned, the foreign minister said they were asking Iraqi authorities not to execute those people, but he also said they had a fair trial. So do you think European countries who have nationals that joined Daesh would welcome moves like Iraq is taking?
Well, I think that they might welcome it, but I think that they'll also face domestic pressure. The Shahima Begum case that I've mentioned is an example of that. The British government decided to strip this young woman of her nationality. She had a family connection to Bangladesh, but the Bangladeshi government said that she had she didn't in fact have Bangladeshi nationality at all. It's a really complicated issue, particularly when it involves children. And I do think it's important to point out that children who are underage have no responsibility at all for what their parents did. So that's an enormously complicating factor. And I think I'm right in saying that in the French case, they have quietly repatriated children of French nationals whose own fate is still uncertain.
My last question. In the past, we see the intelligence sharing between Turkey and European countries were limited. But now we see some improvements.
Yes.
Do you believe it is enough to trace these fighters, these terrorists, and prevent them from infiltrating Turkey?
I think it's not enough yet. As Yasser mentioned here, there is these very gray areas there. Who is responsible? For instance, does the SDF have any jurisdiction on anything, let alone trying people? I mean, can they operate a municipality running water system? Who are they? They are, as far as all the parties are all practically concerned, are extension of PKK and PYD, and they have no right to do anything in Syria. So they cannot hold anybody in custody. And Europeans should remember one thing. When they passed through Turkey, it was legal to do that. But now they are criminals. They should be tried either there or either in Turkey or in an international court. Before they do that, they shouldn't, France and Germany and England, shouldn't force Turkey to open a channel to allow them to go back to their country.
Yes, I think we have to leave it here, and I guess we will be talking about the Syrian issue in the coming future as well. I would like to thank Ian Black, who joined us from London, and Hakkı Öcal and Yasser Tabara. Gentlemen, thank you for your contributions to Straight Talk. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ayşe Süberker. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.